What was the trespass offering that was to be offered to God? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Leviticus on Walking Through the Bible.
His word, the glory of His cross.
If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Leviticus chapter 5. We're going to be reading from verses 14 to 19. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Leviticus chapter 5, beginning at verse 14. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, If a person commits a trespass and sins unintentionally in regard to the holy things of the Lord, then he shall bring to the Lord as his trespass offering a ram without blemish from the flocks, with your valuation in shekels of silver, according to the shekel of the sanctuary, as a trespass offering. And he shall make restitution for the harm that he has done in regard to the holy thing, and shall add 1/5 to it, and give it to the priest. So the priest shall make atonement for him with the ram of the trespass offering, and it shall be forgiven him. If a person sins and commits any of these things, which are forbidden to be done by the commandments of the Lord, though he does not know it, he is guilty, and shall bear his iniquity. And he shall bring to the priest a ram without blemish from the flock, with your valuation, as a trespass offering. So the priest shall make atonement for him regarding his ignorance, in which he erred and did not know it, and it shall be forgiven him. It is a trespass offering. He has certainly trespassed against the Lord. At the beginning of this chapter, we made note that up until verse 13, we were not talking about the trespass offering, but still talking about the sin offering. The reason is that the trespass offering was an offering that was offered when restitution needed to be made, and no restitution was mentioned in that section, despite the word trespass being used in verse 6. Coming now to verse 14, we do get the instructions for the trespass offering. Note that like the other offerings that have been mentioned so far, this offering was to be made for unintentional sins, sins that were committed out of carelessness, neglect, spiritual weakness, being deceived, or ignorance. They weren't to be offered for what the Old Testament sometimes calls presumptuous sins, sins that are committed by a knowing and intentional act of defiance against the law of God without any care about what the consequences might be. We'll see the punishment for those types of sins in our study of Numbers. Verse 14 identifies the unintentional sins being first talked about, which are sins against the holy things of the Lord. Anything that was holy to the Lord, such as tithes, offerings of first fruits, etc., that was not given when it was supposed to, would require a trespass offering to be offered in order for the person to receive the promise of forgiveness of sins by God. The sacrifice would be a ram without blemish from the flocks, along with the value of the silver required in order to make restitution. The shekel of the sanctuary, as we discussed in our study of Exodus, weighed about 0.4 ounces, so the value that was required was weighed out in shekels, in this case silver. But not only were they to repay the value amount of what was neglected to be given, they were to add 20% to it and give it to the priest. This fine should prevent the Israelites from committing these types of sins, for that fine wasn't based on a person's ability to pay, but was equal for all the people. The priest would then offer the ram as a trespass offering, something we'll discuss further in chapter 7. Coming to verse 17, we find what happens when a person commits any of these things for which a trespass offering is required, but does not know that he had committed this sin at the time that he sinned. Is ignorance an excuse that would avoid the sacrifice? No, it was not. A person may truly be ignorant of the law, and while in his ignorance will obviously not offer any sacrifice. But that doesn't mean that the person is somehow not guilty. When their ignorance is found out by them, they are still required to make the sacrifice. Like the one who sinned unintentionally and knew it at the time, the sacrifice required would be the same, a ram without blemish, with the proper valuation for the sin that was committed. Today, we're not under the law of Moses, and these physical sacrifices do not apply to us, but sin still exists. There is sin committed unintentionally, there is sin committed intentionally, and there is sins committed in ignorance. We will find in the New Testament that all sin has the ability to be forgiven by the blood of Christ, who is the antitype of the sacrifices offered under the law of Moses. We have seen clearly in our studies of Matthew and Mark thus far that Jesus' sacrifice of himself on the cross was the antitype of the sin sacrifice, but at the same time, it was also the antitype of the trespass offering, for he paid the price for sin that needed to be paid, his own shed blood. That was such a high price to pay, and though Jesus didn't deserve to pay it, For he did not sin. He paid that price willingly on our behalf, that if we put our faith and trust in him and obey his will, we can have our sins forgiven and be saved. We should thus be thankful to Jesus for his willingness to do this. We'll continue our look at the trespass offering, the Lord willing, in the next episode. With that, our time is up for today, Lord willing. We hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Leviticus chapter 6, verses 1 to 7, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.